Winston Churchill was many things. He was brilliant, brave, stubborn. He was a polymath, a gifted orator and writer, an eccentric, a racist, a megalomaniac. He was a man with uncanny political instincts who could see what many others couldn't, from the threat of Nazi Germany to the Iron Curtain of the Cold War era. And few recognise this better than himself. Now, I don't wish to cheapen Churchill's memory or his seismic role in World War II, but unwritten British etiquette dictates that any self-important person, regardless of their brilliance, should be gently tripped up on the way to the podium. Crack open his 6-volume memoirs on World War II, and you'll find enough self-praise to power a small country. So, let's begin, shall we? Here's a closer look at some of Churchill's more farcical gloating sprees, and how much he just loved to be right. Churchill's 6-volume memoir/epic, The Second World War, is more than just an historical account of the conflict. It's a masterclass in self-vindication. Written from the perspective of a man who jetted around the globe to witness the war's major theatres firsthand, the book is both a detailed analysis and a triumphant declaration of "I was right all along." Its inherent biases need no explanation. Churchill is the martyr, the saviour. While most historians simply cannot in good faith deny Churchill's qualities or his strengths as a leader, the book has been meticulously dissected to redress Churchill's messiah complex. In the very first volume, Churchill's convictions about Hitler take centre stage. Long before the world awoke to the threat of Nazi Germany, he was the one who argued that Hitler's aggression needed to be checked as early as possible. Churchill believed that had the Allies acted sooner, Hitler's rise to power could have been prevented and the catastrophic war avoided. So certain is he in the correctness of his warnings and so dismayed that they are ignored, that he opens the book with this gem of melodrama. "There never was a war more easy to stop. One day, President Roosevelt told me that he was asking publicly for suggestions about what the war should be called. I said at once, the unnecessary war." For Churchill, the people who allowed this war to happen were those supporting the appeasement policy. As many of you will know, appeasement was the strategy predicated on the hope that satisfying Hitler's demands would eventually lead to peace. Churchill saw right through the charade, repeatedly warning Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and his predecessors of Hitler's duplicity. His calls for action, alas, fell on deaf ears. One of the most glaring examples of Churchill's insight was his opposition to the 1935 Anglo-German Naval Agreement. This treaty, which essentially recognised Hitler as a legitimate and equal partner in European politics, was hailed as a diplomatic triumph at the time. Hitler even called the day of its signing, quote, "the happiest day of his life." The British Parliament overwhelmingly sided with him. Churchill, however, was deeply sceptical. In August 1935, he wrote to Foreign Minister Sir Samuel Hoare, cautioning against prioritising diplomacy over military preparedness. Churchill was convinced that Hitler would eventually tear up any treatment he signed, and history, of course, proved him right. Not just with the Naval Agreement, but also with the 1938 Munich Agreement. His satisfaction at being vindicated is palpable in his writing. Reflecting on the Munich Agreement, he writes with a mix of bitterness and triumph, "We must now recall the sad piece of paper which Mr. Chamberlain had got Hitler to sign at Munich. In this he had invoked the two bonds which he assumed existed between him and Hitler and between Britain and Germany, namely the Munich Agreement and the Anglo-German Naval Agreement. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement was now represented by Hitler as a favour to Britain, the benefits of which would be withdrawn as a mark of German displeasure. Anyway, to him it now mattered nothing." When the war began, Churchill wasn't yet Prime Minister. He would assume that role in May 1940. Instead, he was the first Lord of the Admiralty, appointed on September 3rd, 1939, the same day Britain declared war on Germany. Churchill takes immense pride in his work during this period, almost as if he credits himself for single-handedly preparing Britain for the German threat. And to be fair to him, he does make a compelling case. For one, he had held the position of First Lord of the Admiralty during the First World War, giving him first-hand experience in fighting the Germans at sea. Quite astonishingly, he claims that, quote, all the capital ships of the Royal Navy had been built or designed during my administration of the Admiralty from 1911 to 1915, almost 30 years prior. What did all the others do, one might ask? Well, what Churchill claims here is actually true. The last British capital ships were built in 1913, and the first new ones weren't commissioned until 1940, with only 2 exceptions. So, in a sense, the navy Churchill now commanded was truly his own creation. As he put it himself, some might say immodestly, I had amassed an immense amount of detailed information and had learned many lessons about the fleet and war at sea. So, all that's well and good, but did he actually use all this knowledge in practice? Well, what was the single biggest problem the British faced against the Germans in the Atlantic? Their formidable submarine force. And who predicts this right on time? Winston Churchill, of course. On September the 4th, after just one day in office, he stresses he sends his, quote, first Admiralty minute to the Director of Naval Intelligence. Let me have a statement on the German U-boat forces, actual and prospective, for the next few months. Please distinguish between ocean-going and small-size U-boats. Give the estimated radius of action in days and miles in each case. He tells us that in a directive on the same day, he wrote, to avoid confusion, German submarines are always to be described officially as U-boats in all official papers and communiques. And so it was that, in a stroke of bureaucratic genius, he coined the term we still use today. And his expertise weren't just limited to the Navy. His fascination with aviation was also profound. As early as 1935, while still just a member of Parliament, he was warning of the growing threat of the German Air Force. He begged Parliament to increase spending on their own Air Force, but his warnings, as usual, went unheeded. Churchill the martyr later had to say his piece in writing, to be so entirely convinced and vindicated in a matter of life and death to one's country, and not to be able to make Parliament and the nation heed the warning or bow to the proof by taking action, was an experience most painful. He even foresaw, he emphasizes, that London would become a prime target for German bombings, describing it as, quote, the greatest target in the world, a kind of tremendous, fat, valuable cow tied up to attract the beast of prey. But how could he foresee such an unlikely development during peacetime? Well, he'd been doing his homework. He clearly had a knack for uncovering certain critical information from his allies. In his memoir, he copies a letter he penned in June 1938 to the French Prime Minister, which is again rather telling. The general French estimate of the German Air Force at the present time agrees with the private views I've been able to form. He couldn't resist a bit of self-congratulation when writing the letter, and he clearly felt the same impulse while writing his memoirs. You can only imagine Daladier's reaction to this flex, totally unsolicited and out of nowhere. But part of this can be explained by Churchill being something of a military nerd, who seemed to miss nothing about technological developments. True to form, Churchill subtly implies to us that he might even have had a patent share in the most consequential weapon in the war, predicting it not in 39, not in 35, but as early as 1925, revealed to us in his memoir with the prelude, quote, it would be wrong to admit these days. And this is what he wrote. Might not a bomb, no bigger than an orange, be found to possess a secret power to destroy a whole block of buildings, nay, to concentrate the force of 1,000 tons of cordite and blast a township at a stroke? Well, you're on the right track, Mr. Churchill, just a little bit bigger. If the prediction seems exaggerated or even a bit lucky, consider this. Churchill also foresaw the importance of radar and sonar, as dicks at the time, technologies that would prove critical in the war. He pushed for their development from the very beginning and, true to form, didn't miss the chance to remind everyone how right he had been. Quote, "The Aztecs did not conquer the U-boat, but without the Aztecs, the U-boat would not have been conquered." So, Churchill thought of himself not just as a political leader, but as a politico-military expert. He could, in fact, prove to have foreseen every major military development long before it actually happened. Or, in his own words, "All this shows that in my long series of campaigns for British rearmament, I was by no means ill-informed." But let's be honest, being the bearer of bad news, making predictions during peacetime, or being fascinated by gadgets might not be enough to convince everyone about his prophetic genius, and it certainly wasn't enough for Churchill. So now let's see if he made any real predictions about the course of the war after it had actually begun. And if he did he have anything to say about it? So, the war begins, and at first everything goes as expected. Poland is defeated, Hitler triumphs and turns his attention to France. Then something monumental happens, something even Churchill failed to foresee. France collapses in just a month. Everyone is stunned. The British had based their entire war strategy on the blueprint of the First World War, with their army fighting alongside France on French soil. Now, that plan is in ruins. For Churchill, who prided himself on his foresight, this must have come as a bitter blow. But he quickly compensates with a series of crucial predictions. The first of these concerns the French fleet. When Germany defeated France, it only conquered the mainland. The formidable French navy, however, remained at sea, with much of it finding refuge in French colonies in North Africa. Churchill feared this force could fall into German hands and be turned against Britain. "At all costs, at all risks, in one way or another, we must make sure that the navy of France does not fall into wrong hands," he declared. True to his word, on July 3rd, 1940, the British launched Operation Catapult, attacking the French naval base in Mers-el-Kebir, Algeria, and sank several ships. French admirals were furious, understandably so, as even Churchill himself called it, quote, "a hateful decision, the most unnatural and painful in which I have ever been concerned." Still, the decision was far from wrong, as events soon proved. The surviving French battleships created major problems for the British naval war effort. Some of them, including the brand new battleship Richelieu, was stationed at Dakar. When the British tried to capture this crucial West African port in September 1940, Richelieu and the French fleet dealt them a decisive defeat, a setback that delayed Allied control of African colonies for nearly 2 years. Other escaped ships like Jean Bart and Strasbourg caused similar headaches. One can only imagine how much worse it might have been if Churchill hadn't acted. Yet Churchill, ever the master of vindication, doesn't let the matter simply rest there. In a rare break from his chronological narrative, he includes a letter from French Admiral François Darlan, dated December 1942, 2.5 years later. In 1940, Darlan had bitterly protested Churchill's attacks on the French fleet, arguing it left France defenseless. But by 1942, he'd completely reversed his position. His letter essentially apologizes for his earlier anger and thanks Churchill for Britain's support of French independence, tacitly admitting his initial criticism was unfair. And so the chapter closes smoothly, as it must, with Churchill once again proven right. The loss of the French fleet created another major problem for the British. Without France's support, Britain could no longer maintain control of the Mediterranean. This was a serious setback as it severed Britain's direct communication with Egypt and through the Suez Canal with British India. And the situation only worsened. In February 1941, German forces under General Erwin Rommel landed in North Africa and began advancing alongside the Italians towards British-held Egypt. The situation looked dire for the nearly isolated British forces there. By July, American advisor Harry Hopkins declared the position indefensible and essentially urged Churchill to abandon it, focusing instead on the Battle of the Atlantic. Another American officer ranked the Middle Eastern theatre as the fourth most important front, behind Britain and the Atlantic, Australasia, and the security of the seas in general. Probably having similar thoughts, the Australian Prime Minister expressed concerns about the defences in the Far East, particularly in Singapore, and pressed Churchill to send more troops. But Churchill would have none of it. In an especially aggressive, almost arrogant letter to Australian Prime Minister, he first made sure the other side knew exactly who they were dealing with. "I thank you for your frank expression of views. I have no responsibility for the neglect of our defences and policy of appeasement which preceded the outbreak of the war. I had given ceaseless warnings for 6 years before the war began." The undying correctness. But then came the knockout blow. "The eastward flow of reinforcements and aircraft from this island has been maintained from that date forward to the utmost limit of our shipping capacity and other means of moving aircraft and tanks. I deem the Middle East a more urgent theatre than the new christened ABDA area." And there you have it. Churchill, stubborn as ever, insisting against all advice and sticking to his guns. Was he proven right? Well, by holding firm and prioritising Egypt, despite losing Singapore in the meantime, the Allies secured their first major victories. In less than 2 years, they had driven the Axis out of North Africa. By that point, though, it was too late for British and American recognition. After all, they had tried to take his toy, Egypt, away from him, and that's something he could never forget. So, any vindication coming from that side is of no use to him. However, there was someone else whose recognition Churchill craved: Joseph Stalin. Throughout the book, Churchill paints Stalin as a mysterious figure who rarely speaks his mind, only when absolutely necessary. He's portrayed as a cunning politician whose mistakes all predate 1941. A master of warfare whose opinions on strategy actually carry weight. So, during a personal meeting in Moscow in August 1942, Churchill revealed to Stalin the plans for Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. Up to that point, Stalin had seemed unimpressed by what he'd heard, even bored. But then, quote unquote, Stalin became intensely interested. He began firing off questions about the plan, and after Churchill gladly explained the details, quote again, Stalin, whose interest was now at high pitch, said, "May God prosper this undertaking." This moment is key to Churchill's narrative. However we judge Stalin today, Churchill ranked his opinion second only to Roosevelt's, the only two men he deemed his true equals. That Stalin embraced Torch instantly, while Anglo-American advisors had resisted for years, became Churchill's ultimate proof to readers. He had seen North Africa's importance first, and now even the reticent Stalin confirmed it. If that's not vindication, what is? So, the Middle East and Africa, Churchill's second priority in the war, were won thanks to his stubborn insistence. But let's be honest, second place was never going to satisfy someone like Churchill. Fortunately for him, it just so happens he was absolutely right about the first priority too, the Atlantic. The major operation in the Atlantic, and one of the two most critical battles of the war, was undoubtedly the Normandy landings. To the untrained eye, landing on Normandy's vast, beautiful beaches might seem easy, even pleasant. But when you picture those beaches lined with trenches, mines, and assault guns, and imagine trying to land hundreds of thousands of troops across the treacherous waters of the Atlantic, the situation suddenly looks far more daunting. Now, as we said earlier, when France fell in 1940, the shock was overwhelming. Many in Britain even considered surrender now that they stood alone against the seemingly invincible Nazi war machine. But not Churchill. Not only did he remain steadfast in his belief in Britain's defence, but even before the German invasion of France had ended, he was already planning on how to take France back. And this is how we learn that the Normandy invasion was in fact Churchill's brainchild all along. I had always been fascinated by amphibious warfare, and the idea of using tanks to run ashore from specially constructed landing craft on beaches when they were not expected, had long been in my mind. As early as 1917, Churchill had proposed a plan to the then Prime Minister for constructing specialised boats to land troops and tanks, a feat that still hadn't been achieved 25 years later. But now, with the war in full swing, Churchill returned to his idea with renewed vigour. So, on the 6th of June 1940, he began what he called, quote, a long series of minutes in which the design and construction of tank landing craft was ordered and steadily passed. And when he says steadily, he really means it. Now, bear with me. Remember, this is Churchill picking his facts. On the 7th of July 1940, Churchill directly tasks the Minister of Supply with the, quote, designing and planning vessels to transport tanks across the sea for a British attack on enemy countries. In March 1941, Churchill requests a report on the, quote, progress of the ships to carry and disgorge tanks. In July 1941, Churchill first asked the United States to start building landing ship, tanks, or LSTs as he calls them. That is, before they even enter the war. On the 30th of May 1942, Churchill issues a minute regarding the development of extremely accurate technical details concerning LSTs. Quote, they must float up and down with the tide, the anchor problem must be mastered, the ships must have a side flap in them, and a drawbridge long enough to overreach the moorings of the piers. In August 1942, Churchill again impresses upon President Roosevelt the urgent need for the United States to build as large a number of tank landing and other assault craft as possible. In January 1943, Churchill notes that President Roosevelt had agreed that the United States should make an, quote, even larger effort to construct these craft. And in December 1943, Churchill is, quote, anxiously awaiting a full list of all landing craft of all types, just to make sure they listened to him and really built enough of them. One might wonder why Churchill makes such a fuss about this. Well, it turns out that after the war, many rushed to accuse him of being opposed to the Normandy landings, the Allies' most glorious moment. Churchill, of course, is having none of it. And he sets the record straight very early on in his books, just in Volume 2. In view of the many accounts which are extant and multiplying of my supposed aversion from any kind of large-scale opposed landing such as took place in Normandy in 1944, it may be convenient if I make it clear that from the beginning I provided a great deal of impulse and authority for creating the immense apparatus and armada for the landing of armour on beaches, without which it is now universally recognized that all such major operations would have been impossible. I shall unfold this theme step by step in these volumes by means of documents written by me at the time, which show a true and consistent purpose on my part in harmony with the physical facts and a close correspondence with what was actually done. And that's what you get for trying to prove Churchill wrong. But, to their great peril, they would try again even before the war was over. It's the 5th of April, 1945. Nazi Germany is on the brink of surrender, and the Allies are celebrating. Everyone is happy, relaxed, but not Churchill. His prediction skills are always on high alert, and he smells danger. Stalin, he believes, is not to be trusted. Months earlier, at Yalta, the three Allies had agreed on zones of occupation, dividing Germany among themselves. But Churchill isn't satisfied. He sends the following message to President Roosevelt. Since Yalta, the Russians have sent no confirmation of these zones. Now that they are on the eve of taking Vienna and very likely will occupy the whole of Austria, it may well be prudent for us to hold as much as possible in the north. In essence, Churchill is asking the American president to betray an ally, but he knows the stakes better than anyone. It's just no one seems to understand him. And then, on April 12th, President Roosevelt dies. His successor, Harry Truman, shifts focus to Japan, and the Anglo-American forces failed to secure Europe from Soviet influence as Churchill had hoped. By May 1945, Churchill was already speaking about the Iron Curtain a phrase he'll forever be associated with. And once again, there's only one way for him to deal with the bitterness of being ignored, by emphasizing how right he was. So in his final book, he writes, "It is true that American thought is at least disinterested in matters which seem to relate to territorial acquisitions, but when wolves are about, the shepherd must guard his flock, even if he does not himself care for mutton." The problems were, of course, unnoticed by and unknown to the public. Nevertheless, as will not now be disputed, they played a dominating part in the destiny of Europe. But at this stage, I could only warn and plead. Henceforward, Russian imperialism and the communist creed saw and set no bounds to their progress and ultimate dominion. I should not tell this tale now, when all is plain in glaring sight, if I had not known it and felt it when all was dim, and when abounding triumph only intensified the inner darkness of human affairs. Of this, the reader must be the judge. And so, Churchill's warnings about the Soviet Union went unheeded and the Cold War began. If only he had been listened to this time, it might never have started. It could have been as unnecessary as the Second World War itself. Yet, after the war, the world stopped listening to his opinions. The results, as Churchill would have eagerly pointed out, were nothing short of catastrophic. Or at least, that's what he'd like us to believe. Because for Churchill, being right wasn't just a matter of pride. It was a matter of history. And history, as he knew better than anyone, has a way of proving him right in the end.